Hello folks, I hope you're doing good. In this video, I'll be discussing a series of topics related to horror and queerness in the rural South, the region known as the Texas Panhandle to be precise, where Route 77, the haunted highway, takes place. We'll start with a short geography lesson since I believe it is important to talk about the space these characters occupy during the events of the story. So, what exactly is the Texas Panhandle? Well, it is a square-shaped and predominantly rural region of 26 counties in northernmost Texas. It is estimated that around 7.2% of males and 16.2% of females aged between 18 and 19 identify as LGBTQ+, so that will be around 38,000 people. Despite these estimates, the Panhandle is a religious and politically conservative part of the state. The socio-political climate presents significant challenges for LGBTQ+ individuals and their families as well. Does this mean that rural areas are always socially conservative, hostile, and homophobic? Well, no, because space is not absolute or fixed. It is dynamic and full of inquiry. It is a site of contestation, so space is inhabited by diverse groups of people, basically. So there's no coherent essence of southernness, since space is always being created in the present moment. Now, keeping the idea of space as a site of contestation in mind, let's move on to the cast of characters of this version. First we have Tuesday, the mysterious maid of a haunted motel. Secondly, Argus, a mercenary looking for Kayla, and Barbara, an Utu magazine editor with a sheep's head and daughter to three mothers, an arcanist, a human, and a sheep mother. So, what do these characters have in common, you may ask? Well, in my opinion, all three of these characters share in common the fact that their existence can be considered outside of hegemonic cultural categories, not only because all of them are arcanists, but also because of their appearance, their gender, their sexuality, age, and social class, giving way to different kinds of vulnerabilities and discrimination. I'll be analyzing these characters through an intersectionality-focused lens, an analytical framework that has its roots in Black feminism to help us understand and explore the complex experience of belonging to multiple identities and social groups. First, let's start with Tuesday, shall we? Ever since she was a kid, Tuesday loved horror stories. She would often scare her friends, telling them all kinds of horror stories about ghosts in the attic, for example, and eyes that lurk in the depths of the forest. She's been the object of all kinds of rumors after her disappearance, so it's no wonder that she will end up going to a haunted motel surrounded by rumors and stories, much like herself. She immediately identifies with the haunted motel, which takes the form of either a small alligator baby or a giant beating heart. The fact that she relates to this monster shouldn't surprise us at all, considering most horror fans identify actually with the monster when they feel they represent their own experiences of society, rendering their existence as monstrous, also providing people with the opportunity to live out their rage against the oppressive social order. Through the story, we can find multiple instances actually that point to Argus's and Tuesday's sexuality being outside of that established by the heteronormative societal standards. Queer people suffer a number of societal aggressions as punishment for their non-normative transgressions, and similarly, horror films are censored and banned at both familial, community and national levels, often considered a lowly genre by scholars and critics. It's in this transgressive nature and the explicit illustrations of taboos as well that queer people identify with. They basically connect to horror through a shared status as societal transgressions and the figurative author. In horror, we can find a cathartic space where non-normative bodies, identities, and expressions are being actively centralized. When we think about it, queer as both an identity and term is imbued with the ghosts of our collective traumatic past, the trauma of being queer in a system built to invalidate and destroy anyone that strays from the norm. Heteronormative society renders queer people as societal specters. Our story is actively neglected, feared, and invisible. We are haunted not only by our collective history but the dominance of cis heteronormativity as well. And I believe that in Tuesday we can clearly see the haunted nature of queerness. As I mentioned, queer people have a distinctive relationship with horror. However, individual intersectionality can shift one's experiences with horror narratives. For example, Horrorpedia and Tuesday don't have the same relationship with the horror genre, not only because of the fact they were raised in different contexts, but because Horrorpedia is a man and Tuesday is a lesbian. Women occupy a privileged place in horror media, which largely stems from their significant representation in screen time in horror movies in comparison to men. The fact that horror movies are dominated by women is another reason why queer women love horror so much. Mind you, I'm not saying horror fandom is a perfect space for minorities, as you might be aware. These spaces are usually full of white men, and there's a problem specifically with male horror fans that only demand blood and boobs from the genre, and they gatekeep horror, and they represent a very toxic masculinity. There's also the issue of LGBTQ+ characters being historically portrayed as one-dimensional victims or villains. That being said, let's move on to Argus. Throughout the patch, we can see that Argus' adoption and reinterpretation of traditionally masculine roles challenges gender norms, while there's some debate whether Argus could be considered a butch or not. She'll be referred as such in this analysis, considering butches are a spectrum after all, as big as one's self-perception, and cannot be defined solely on a series of characteristics, especially considering Argus's job as a mercenary and bounty hunter. It rejects the classical division of labor and gender-based expectations. Butches prove how masculinity and femininity are a cultural phenomenon, basically, and how this could be reformulated and eliminated. She embraces a kind of masculinity that does not exist in relation to cisgender men, one that does not belong in heteronormativity. We could also mention how she acts as Kayla's guardian, her femme partner, as well as for other members of her community against external aggressions or threats. In the story, we can also see how this responsibility puts her under intense pressure as well, taking a toll on her health. It's important to mention too that butch masculinity does not imply the subordination of the femme, but the desire and power dynamic are completely different from the heterosexual models. It is a reciprocal collaboration, and in her character we can see a queer and alternative masculinity that does not need the exclusion of femininity to exist, challenging traditional notions of power and gender. Intersectionality is also a central aspect in butch identity, Argus being a lesbian woman with a disability, a vision impairment and half blindness. She is also at the intersection of multiple stigmatized identities, having to contend with both ableist and heteronormative public perceptions. Her identity serves as a form of rejection and resistance against the stereotypes reinforced towards her. Another character that's at an intersection is Barbara, having to manage a chronic illness throughout the chapter. She constantly worries about the amount of battery she has left in her only means to alleviate her condition while trapped inside the haunted motel. And she also deals with mistreatment and discrimination related to her appearance. For example, when she's left on her own on the side of the highway, an event that triggers the events of the whole story. She also mentions how usual it is for people to have extreme reactions when seeing her for the first time, often thinking she's some sort of horrifying hallucination. And we could also mention how she suffers at the hands of Tuesday because of her age, being referred to as a baby and not taken seriously no matter how often she will express her worries. Luckily, she's able to find a place where she's accepted, outside of Utu in Bertin's suitcase, where she was warmly greeted by the children there. Finally, in Argus's relationship with Tuesday, we can find the dynamics of a butch-femme relationship. they differentiate each other, not only by their attitudes, but their style choices and the roles they assume in their relationship as well. While some people believe this division reproduces heterosexual dynamics, with butches being perceived as the ones with an active role, in reality it is the transformation of such dynamics. Butch-femme relationships subvert the power hierarchy of present in heterosexual relationships, which are based on gender, by negotiating identities and roles in queer terms. For example, butches redefine masculinity. Instead of assuming it implies dominance, they redefine it as reciprocity, care, and protection, while femme lesbians' femininity often becomes an expression of power and desire that transforms the relationship, so they are not passive or subordinate at all. I'll conclude the video by saying that gender, rather than being a representation of biological conditions, Butler understands it as a series of repetitive actions that create an effect of naturalization of the gender expression, a set of rules that reinforce the binary division of gender in male and female. It is queer practices such as these that destabilize gender norms, revealing them as an artificial construct. It is through such practices that we can open the door to new forms of expression and resistance. Okay, I think that's it. Now, was this video an excuse to teach gacha players about queer theory? Maybe. This is my first time actually making a video like this, so I hope you all enjoyed it, or at least could learn something new from it. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know your thoughts on the comments. Goodbye. I hope you all good health and take care.